Happy World Wetlands Day. We're doing this seminar on the day, which is really great timing for the organisers, I have to say. Today we have three speakers: Mahuru Wilcox, Yvonne Taura, and Bev Clarkson. They're all coming to us from Hamilton, and they're going to share the workload today through our session. I will come back online at question time. So if you have a question, it's really helpful for me if you can put it in quite early into the chat box. We sometimes don't get through all of our questions because, you know, we're covering some really interesting material here. Rest assured, if we don't get to answer it in our session today, we will come back to you to get that answered for you directly. So without further ado, I'm going to hand straight on over to Mahuru and Yvonne on the controls.
Tēnā tātou katoa, no mai haere mai. Thank you for taking time out of your morning to join us to hear about Te Reo Te Repo on this significant day. As part of international recognition for World Wetlands Day and the amazing job that our repo do, we also wanted to highlight the importance of repo for us as Māori here in Aotearoa. So before we hear more about that, we're going to do a little round of introductions so you know who we are. So I'll start with myself. Ko pūtawaki, ko maua o ngā maunga, ko ohini mataroa, ko waikaria o ngā awa. Ko ngai tamarawa ho ko Ngāti Pū ke ko ngā hapū, ko Ngāti awa ko Ngāti ranginui ngā iwi, ko Mahuru Wilcox a hau. I'm a kairanga hau Maori at Manaaki Whenua based in the Hamilton office. And I've been working in the wetland and freshwater space for about 7 or 8 years now. 7 or 8 years now, so I'm starting to lose count, but I love it and I'm looking forward to sharing some of the work that we've been doing. I'll pass on to my colleague Yvonne Taura. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou, ko ai au, he ri tēnei no Ngāti Ranginui, Ngāti Haua, Ngāti Tūparetoa, Ngāti Onuku ngā iwi, ko Yvonne Taura tōku ingoa. So kia ora everyone. I'm Yvonne and I'm also a kairanga hau Māori here at Manaaki Whenua in the Hamilton office, and I'm also the Vision Mātauranga lead for the Wetlands program led by Manaaki Whenua. So, kia ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Bev Clarkson tōku ingoa no Tūranganui a Kiwa, kei kirikiri roa e noho ana e nāianei, kei Manaaki Whenua e mahi ana, e kai mahi repo oho. Kia ora, I'm Bev and I work at Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research in Hamilton as a plant ecologist, mainly in wetlands, and I lead the wetland research program. Kia ora.
So a bit of an outline of our presentation today. There's going to be sort of 3 main focus points. We're going to start with a bit of an intro on the importance of wetlands, and then cover Te Reo Te Repo, the cultural wetlands handbook. And then the new resource, Tui Honua Te Reo Te Repo, which was released yesterday, an educational resource. And then lastly, the volume 2 of Te Reo Te Repo, which will be coming out in 2021. Kia ora.
So wetlands are really important because they provide large environmental, economic, social and cultural benefits, and these are called ecosystem services. So wetlands remove nutrients and sediments that are washed in from the land, and they're sometimes referred to as nature's kidneys. And they also lock up carbon and peat, and they provide food and important cultural resources. But despite this, wetlands in Aotearoa have been severely reduced since European settlements. So more than 90% of them have been drained and developed. And our remaining wetlands are under threat because they continue to degrade through ongoing drainage, too much nutrients and too many weeds and pests. So the North Island has fared particularly badly at only 4.9% of the original wetlands remain. And there are 2 large wetlands there in the northern Waikato, and these are internationally significant Ramsar sites. So the South Island, this is less populated, and 16% of wetlands remain, and there are still many wetlands, particularly on the west coast and in Southlands. So in total for New Zealand, 10% of our wetlands remain. So in recognising that our wetlands are under threat, the Wetland Research Program in the early days focused on developing best practice techniques and tools to restore the biophysical components of wetlands, and these include hydrology, nutrients, and how to bring back native plants and animals. But this work highlighted a significant gap on restoring and protecting the cultural aspects of wetlands, and this is an area that we've been focusing on in recent years.
Kia ora, Bev. So just before I go on, I'd just like to send a big mihi and acknowledgement to Sheree Van Schuivendijk-Goodman. She is a co-editor of Te Repo alongside me and Bev. Bev, did I cut you off?
No.
So yeah, she's really the brainchild of Te Repo, and with her vision, along with working with me and Bev, we've been able to create some really great resources. So ngā mihi nui kia koe e hoa, if you're out there watching. So back in 2010, Manaaki Whenua and Waikato-Tainui signed an MOU, research partnership agreement, which really allowed us to work together to identify wetland research priorities and undertake collaborative projects within the Wetlands program. So for about 6 years, we undertook various collaborative iwi-led research projects together, offered various training opportunities, and built capability for some of our tribal members. One of them was myself. That's a totally different story. That's a whole other story. But one of these projects was to contribute to the Wetland Handbook series, so the Wetland Restoration Handbook that Bev was just showing us. And we identified a gap where the cultural wetland values of Māori hadn't been addressed within the handbook. So we wanted to increase the awareness of wetland restoration from a cultural perspective, and that's where Te Repo, the voice of the wetland, was conceived. So this was a major priority for Waikato-Tainui at the time. So this has since been released since 2017. So through Te Repo, we wanted to give a voice to the repo through the voices of our people. So the themes throughout the handbook are renewed and vibrant connections between whānau and Te Repo, understanding our cultural values, and learning from case studies on wetland restoration, cultural indicators, and monitoring approaches. So these were all led by or in collaboration with tangata whenua. The articles are written by Māori researchers or scientists who were working alongside, partnered with iwi and hapu. So throughout the handbook, we made sure that the whakaaro resonated with all of the contributors, as we acknowledged that their unique tribal whakaaro were told by different iwi perspectives. So the handbook provides best practice techniques for the enhancement and protection of cultural wetland values. And what we've found since its release is that the handbook's assisted local authorities, research providers, and community groups in their understanding of cultural priorities for wetland restoration. So the handbook has been divided into 3 sections, and we'll explain these sections as we go along. So here's the map of where all of the kaupapa of each of the chapters came from. As you'll see, this one was quite Waikato-centric, and as we had quite a lot of our own tribal members leading research at the time, and we'd already undertaken multiple collaborative projects with Waikato-Tainui. But we always intended that the handbook to be a living document with more stories to tell in the future, and I'll get to that a little bit later. So the cup of tea section was really an important section to have right up front of the book. It's dedicated to providing ways of developing meaningful relationships between agencies and tangata whenua. You know, we saw that developing relationships was really quite important with your partners, as it often determines the outcomes of your research projects. And in our experience, we'd seen some really we've seen some challenges and successes specific to those partnerships. So Mahuru is going to talk about her master's research project that features in the cup of tea section of the handbook, where she was able to create a respectful and reciprocal research partnership.
Kia ora. So my master's project was focused on collaborative work with Ngāti Whakamarūrangi at Te Repo Wetland. So I was lucky enough to have an existing relationship with Ngāti Whakamarūrangi and Mō Marae through my mother's partner, Taruke. And without Taruke's support and drive, none of this would have been possible. So having that existing relationship really helped with that collaborative aspect. One of the things that we can do as researchers is we find ourselves in the role of the expert, and one of the things I questioned quite early on was actually not being an expert, and Ngāti Whakamarūrangi were the expert in this area, but being science trained, I also had tools that could support them. So it was a good humbling experience, which I think really helped the success of this project. The next slide, Yvonne. So a bit of history about Te Repo. So it's a 223 hectare swamp located between Raglan and Aotea Harbour, so out on that west coast. You can see in that bottom right photo that's looking towards the west, so heading out to sea. It's a very remote area surrounded by private land, so I think that's been a bit of a blessing because there haven't been pest animals introduced like carp and things like that. And it's also home to multiple threatened species. So it's a significant place historically and today, and food basket for Ngāti Whakamarūrangi and Mō Marae. And using the Te Repo as a food basket helps to maintain that connection of people in place. So these numbers 1 to 5 are just a very brief overview of the process that I used and that I found helpful. So really working in collaboration from the beginning around identifying the aims and values of this whole project, and then identifying those key and important aspects of the Te Repo, and from those the specific indicators were developed. So Ngāti Whakamarūrangi developed a cultural health indicator for the Te Repo wetland, and I focused on the more sciencey monitoring approaches. So we had a sort of dual approach and then could look at the different results, whether they were aligned or not. Next one. So some of the key outcomes of this research was really showing how you could use 2 different worldviews and methods, and they are quite different, but they can also be complementary. So having both assessment tools help to identify management priorities and informed planning, so that's a really important outcome. But also to be aware, so when developing cultural health indicators, it's very site specific and unique to each area, so creating generic ones and expecting them to be relevant for all wetlands was not appropriate. And also only tangata whenua can develop these CHIs and indicators and then carry out the assessment. So it was important to really separate myself from that because I don't whakapapa to that area. And my role was to really support Ngāti Whakamarūrangi to do that monitoring themselves. It's also important to remember that when you have both methods, that you need input from tangata whenua at the data interpretation and right up phase 2. Otherwise, you can easily apply your own lens as a researcher, even if you're Māori, and the info is no longer relevant for the people that you're working with. So this is quite a good segue to the next section in the handbook, which is around cultural indicators. So this section really identifies what cultural indicators are, the importance of them in terms of managing and restoring culturally important resources, and then some case studies with meaningful indicators and tohu that you could use or that have worked for others. And then it gives some background to some taonga species too. So it's a really informative chapter, and I recommend having a look.
Right, this next section is tools and approaches, and the use of herbicide to control weeds is often controversial, and what are the effects on other organisms? So we've got chapters in the book on the impacts of willow control on aquatic and terrestrial invertebrates in wetlands in South Taupo and also Whangamarino. And in these cases, the impacts on the invertebrates was driven more by the hydrology and also the loss of the willow canopy rather than the herbicide itself. So these studies were important and led into a restoration journey of islands on the Waikato River, which were returned to Waikato-Tainui. And one of the islands was restored with herbicide and the other one without herbicide, and focusing on native plants outcompeting the exotic weeds. So the project was led by iwi, particularly Maori and Marae, and involved multi-stakeholders and also used a combination of Mātauranga and Western science. So the chapter outlines the many successes and challenges of restoring these islands in the middle of a large river.
Oh, ka pai, Bev, ka pai Mahuru. And so the last section of the handbook is Mātauranga Māori, and as Mahuru's quite well highlighted, the importance of having iwi involved in these projects. So Mātauranga Māori is a multifaceted knowledge system that reflects understanding of the world from a culture perspective and is intimately linked through whakapapa. So this section explores the application of Mātauranga Māori and whakapapa for the restoration of repo by tangata whenua. And in this section, we've included some examples that demonstrate this quite successfully. So yeah, so that's the handbook. If you haven't checked it out, I encourage you to check it out on the Manaaki Whenua website, where you can download all of the chapters as well. So as you know, as we've mentioned, Te Repo has been published now for a few years, and it has sought the interest of audiences way beyond what me, Sheree and Bev could have even dreamt of when we initially proposed Te Repo. So over a year ago, I was approached by the Science Learning Hub, a dedicated team of science educators who'd been gaining interest with kaiako and teachers to learn and deliver content about Mātauranga Māori and science within the classrooms. So together we saw that Te Repo presented quite a unique opportunity to increase science engagement with tamariki within the kura by developing bilingual multimedia educational resources that draw extensively from the Māori-led wetland research within the handbook. So with the support of Sheree and Bev, as well as Waikato-Tainui, Manaaki Whenua partnered with the Science Learning Hub to develop Toi Honua Te Reo o Te Repo. So we just wanted to thank the UCM funding from 2020, the Wetlands program, and the University of Waikato for also supporting this project. So yeah, the project gave me an opportunity to work alongside science educators as well as reo Māori experts. We were lucky to work with Whaia Pauline Waiti, an experienced Māori science educator dedicated to improving Māori participation and achievement within the sciences, and Whaia Hini Jacob, who is a well-known Māori linguist who's translated many books for our kura, so she's very well known throughout the kura kaupapa. So our aim with these resources was to increase kura and local communities' understanding to relevant scientific concepts, partnered with Mātauranga Māori to give confidence to actively engage in wetland research and restoration opportunities within their own repo. So it's indicated very early on in the project that some of these educational resources needed to be written completely in Te Reo Māori and introduce science concepts from a Te Ao Māori perspective, as there aren't many resources focused on pūtaiao available for our kura kaupapa Māori. So we worked closely with a selection of kura kaupapa throughout the country who are located close to a local repo, And thankfully, some of these kura were already engaged in their local repo and wanted to implement a wetland restoration program within their kura. So their involvement was crucial in this project to ensure that the resources that we developed aligned to their needs, and the hope to inspire kura to become kaitiaki of their own repo and to hopefully encourage the pursuit of science pathways. So within Tui Honua Te Reo Te Repo, we used quite a few of the case studies within the handbook itself to develop these educational resources, and all of these were given permission by the respective contributors. So thankfully, all of the contributors that we asked were really supportive of this kaupapa because they saw the importance of having our tamariki interact and engage with their local taiao. So altogether, we have over 30 articles illustrating Māori-led wetland research, respective teaching learning guides for the classroom, interactive image maps to navigate the site, and a collection of short video clips featuring key wetland experts, kaitiaki, and kairangahau Māori who all supported the development of these resources. So these are now published exclusively on the Science Learning Hub website. So this is what you'd expect a page to look like. This is the interactive Reo Māori page, and so you just click on one of the themes and it'll take you through to all the available articles and activities linked to that theme. And here we have the Reo Pākehā version as well. So yeah, loads of wetland related content available to assist kaiako from both kura kaupapa Māori and mainstream schools to implement within their classroom and hopefully help them plan their own wetland restoration curriculum. So just a plug, the Science Learning Hub next week are running a PLD session explaining in greater detail the suite of resources available within Tui Honua Te Reo Te Repo. So for any teachers on the webinar, or if you know any teachers who are looking for more pūtaiao related resources, please forward on a link to go and register. So yesterday, like Mahuru said, we launched the resources to Honua Te Reo Te Repo. Yesterday, we were at Lake Ngaroto in Ohaupo in the Waikato. Yeah, National Wetland Trust planned a really great day. We shared the resources with the families that came along. It was nice and hot, but a great day to, I think just a really symbolic day to launch these particular resources. So kia ora, go check them out.
Oh, kia ora, Yvonne. They're amazing resources. Well done. So moving back to the handbook, feedback from readers on Te Reo or Te Repo, our first cultural handbook, basically indicated that the resources had filled a really important gap and provided an excellent presentation of the whānau perspective and was an important resource to promote wetland restoration. So this feedback was from whānau council, international people, and also the former Minister of Conservation there, Eugenie Sage. So with the handbook, as Yvonne, oh, sorry.
That's all right.
Yvonne indicated that the handbook was a living document, so that the plan was to have it as a living document available on the web so that we could add information. But we had so much interest from the iwi throughout the motu that there's enough material now for a whole book in itself. So then we were now moving on to the second volume of our cultural restoration handbook. Over to you, Yvonne.
Yeah, so yeah, we've been kind of working in the background for over a year now. We've got the whole old team back again, our co-editors, me, Bev and Cherie, our peer reviewers, designer, and we're working with a whole new load of contributors from all over the country. So this volume promises to continue delivering on various Māori-led case studies and approaches, robust scientific research and stunning imagery from all over the motu. We're also shining a spotlight on some of our more at-risk native species that have fortunately gone under the radar, and this was identified quite early in our planning that this was really important. So the handbook again will be full of personal journeys of iwi and hapu involved, successes and challenges of undertaking iwi-led restoration, and most importantly, the reconnection of tangata whenua with their repo in their local rohe. So we'll be launching the yet to be named handbook at the Intercol Wetlands conference. This is the first time New Zealand has held this conference here. It's the largest, most influential international conference in the field of wetland science and applications. The conference is going to run alongside the New Zealand and Australian Freshwater Sciences Society, as well as the National Wetland Trust Symposium. So if your role relates to wetlands in any way, this is the conference for you. And we'll all be there as well. So just quickly, some acknowledgements. Loads of people involved in this. This work didn't kind of happen just on our own, but loads of people supporting us in these resources. Cherie from Swamp Frog is definitely the driving force in ensuring that we continue releasing, developing these resources. So just to end our session, here are some links to the resources that we spoke about, Te Reo Te Repo and Tui Honua Te Reo Te Repo, and also the link to register for the Intercol conference. So hopefully we've encouraged you in some way to consider cultural wetland values and approaches for your wetland projects, and enjoy World Wetlands Day. So ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa.
And thank you very much, Yvonne, Mahuru and Bev. That was fantastic. We've gone a little bit over time in the presentation, which is the most important things that we know that you will want to hear. So I'm just going to ask one of the questions that was put to us. It's a little bit different to what you've been talking about. First of all, I did want to let everyone know that the links will be in the email that follows up from this webinar. So later today, you will get an email from us, which gives you access to the recording, so you can see it all again, and the links will all be in that email. Now, Peter has asked us about our view, your view, on artificial wetlands and the incorporation of mana whenua values. I know that's not been covered in your presentation, but I just wondered if you would be able to provide a little bit of input. And Peter will answer the bulk of your question online directly later. But
Bev.
Yvonne or Bev, maybe you can just talk a little bit about artificial wetlands.
Well, I could do it from a Western science perspective, but to me, if we've got natural wetlands or modified wetlands that were sort of originally good wetlands, that is far better than developing artificial wetlands. But on the scale of things, if you've got no wetlands, or artificial wetlands are okay. But you know, I would prefer to restore areas that were once wetlands so that we bring back natural values. Now, I can't speak from the mana whenua side, so I'll leave that to Yvonne.
I think, so Suzanne, would you say Suzanne's MFE project would, where she worked quite closely with mana whenua here in Taupiri, was one of the, was an example that we could share here? Yes.
Yes, well, that's integrated constructed wetlands, which to me is better than just straight constructed wetlands, because integrated constructed wetlands, which originates from Ireland, is actually, it's multi-benefits. So it's biodiversity, it's cultural values, it's recreation, as well as removing nutrients and sediments and pollutants in water. So yes, if there's a restricted space and you know, you're on, for example, a farm, yes, you know, to me, I would promote that rather than just a straight constructed wetland, which need to be managed, and you know, they often don't have the values that more natural wetlands have. So the integrated constructed wetlands is, the mantra is reanimating former wetlands. So again, to me, it's more, you know, restoration. bit of engineering, but you're actually reanimating former wetlands. So it's more on the natural wetland scale to me.
But what I liked about Suzanne's approach was that she involved the mana whenua from Taupiri, involved the marae, involved the local kura, and so there was some, shared learnings while she was doing that project as well. So it's important, I think, her approach was to include mana whenua right from the planning stages, which in then turn allowed them to, evolve in what values were showing up for them. So it's definitely communication with mana whenua to be involved in the project from the start.
I second that, and
thank you.
I think that it's up to mana whenua to decide whether they have values, but constructed wetlands don't have that history to them, so you're losing a lot of things like reo, place names, context to the more natural wetlands that tangata whenua have had a long relationship with, so you're missing all of that. So there may be some biophysical values, but there's a lot of things that you would not be able to reconstruct. Yeah, so that's my 5 cents.
Thank you. That's a really comprehensive answer, and I really appreciate it that the effort in responding to the questions. We will come back on the other questions through our online, and you will receive a quick email from us on that. We're out of time, so we need to finish now, and say goodbye until next time. Thank you.
Thank you,